Well, let's take our Bibles this morning and open up to Proverbs. Proverbs chapter 24. I want you to imagine for a moment that it's 1940. You are living in a European city where Hitler's Nazis have just come storming through and taken control. You are allowed to keep your job and you're allowed to stay living in your home as long as you cooperate and don't cause problems. So things don't change a whole lot for you. But you've heard about Jewish neighbors who have been seen being rounded up and taken into trucks and taken away. You've been hearing that this is going on all over the city. And the rumors are that they're being taken away to camps where they're killing them. What would you do? What would you do? That was a very real experience for brothers and sisters in Christ who lived 80 years ago. If they spoke up, they'd be beaten. If they rose up to do something, they'd be killed. If they just remained quiet and silent and didn't do anything, then they wouldn't be bothered. But how would you live it yourself if you did that? In front of us this morning is a passage of Scripture, some 3 verses that give very clear indications about what should be done in a situation like that. 3 truths that they needed to know to get through that situation successfully. And we have challenging situations as well in which these 3 truths also apply to us. Think about your life today. Are you facing anything challenging? Probably not on that scale. But do you face anything challenging? We're going to find in here, this passage, 3 truths to help with challenging situations. Let's look at this really quickly here. Starting with Proverbs 24, verse 10. Look at verse 10. It says, "If you are slack in the day of distress, your strength is limited." Let me put that up here on the screen. If you are slack in the day of distress, your strength is limited. It says in the King James Version, "If thou faint in the day of adversity, thy strength is small." The NIV says, "If you falter in times of trouble, how small is your strength?" Let me ask you, how strong are you? How strong are you? This passage says your strength is not measured by how much weight you can weight lift. It's what you do in a day of distress, a day of adversity, a day of trouble. What you do, your response in the times of trouble are what measure your strength. So if a time of trouble comes along and you're a 6'2", 250-pound quarterback, but you don't do anything, you're a weakling in God's eyes. But if you're a child who rises up and does something in a time of trouble, you have great strength. God says our strength is measured by what we do in times of trouble. Who of us are in times of trouble today? Well, that's the first truth that we have, and it's in your insert there. The first truth this passage teaches us is that we all live in times of trouble. This day of adversity, this day of trouble, this day of distress is something that God says that's normal here on earth. We all live in times of trouble. You know the verses. John 16:33, Jesus says, the Amplified Version says, "In the world you have tribulation and trials and distress and frustration." It says in Acts 14:22, "We must enter the kingdom of God through many hardships and tribulations." God is very clear about what to expect the normal life of a Christian is going to be. It's going to be tribulation, trials, distress, and frustration. You know, we go through our days and we say, why does life have to be so hard? Why do things have to constantly be going wrong? And Jesus tells us, yes, there are times where it's punctuated by peace and joy, but God says normal for life here on earth is frustration, distress, trouble. This is a fallen world, and we've been plunked down into it, and it's going to be hard. The first truth this passage teaches us is we all live in these times of trouble. All of us do. And then the next verse, verse 11, gives us a specific example of that type of trouble. Look at verse 11. It says, "Deliver those who are being taken away to death, and those who are staggering to slaughter. Oh, hold them back." The second truth for facing challenges that this passage teaches us is that in a time of trouble, we will respond. we will respond. Times of trouble are here, and in times of trouble, we will respond. The trouble here that is being talked about is you're going along and you see a group of people who are being led away to be killed. Now, exactly what the circumstances are, it's not described. It could be a situation where there are captives being taken away to war to be killed. It could be a vigilante group has found someone that they blame and they're taking that person away to be killed. It could be a person who's falsely accused in court and is being taken out behind the court to be killed. It might be a child sacrifice as people are going to offer up a child to their gods. It doesn't exactly say what it is. It applies to all those situations. The one thing that seems evident in every case, though, is that the people who are being led away are innocent. These aren't guilty people who had a fair trial and now are being, put to death. These are people who are innocent, whatever the circumstances might be, who are being led away to death. And God gives us a command when we see anything like that. You see what the command is. First word, deliver them, rescue them. God says, when you come upon this situation, don't just sit there. Don't just look the other way. Don't say, well, if I get involved, something bad could happen to me. God says, get involved. Do something to deliver those people. There are many examples of this in the Bible. Pharaoh ordered that all the baby boys in Egypt who were Jewish be thrown into the Nile and killed, right? Perfect example of that. And what did the Jewish midwives do? They refused to do it. And they stepped up forward, and that was a dangerous thing to do, but they stepped forward anyway, and they saved those boys, among whom was Moses. When Queen Esther heard that there was a plot to kill all the Jews in Babylon, that's a perfect example. Everyone was being led away to death. What did she do? At great risk to herself, she approached the king. And as a result of that, she saved thousands and thousands of lives. Reuben learned that Joseph was going to be killed by his brothers. Rahab learned that the spies were in Jericho and being hunted down. Paul's nephew learned about a plot against Paul made by some people who wanted to kill him. Each one of those people heard that there were people who were being led away to death, and each one of them stood up and did the brave thing, the courageous thing, risked their own lives, and saved the lives of the people who were being led away. This is exactly what happened to the Ten Boom family during 1940s. Corrie Ten Boom's family was living in the Netherlands, occupied by Germans. They saw the Jews being led away, and they said, we can't just watch this. We've got to rise up and help be a part to rescue these people. So as you probably know the story, they built a secret room in their house. They housed small groups of Jews as they were passing through the country and eventually getting out. By the time the war had ended, they had saved over 800 people's lives that way. 800 people would have died. But they stepped forward in obedience to this, showed their strength in the day of trouble, that it was strong, and did something to save them. Now, there were other people in their towns who didn't do anything. They knew that it would be dangerous. They knew that it would be far easier just to look the other way and pretend it wasn't happening, and they did nothing. And when they were asked about it after war, they said, well, we didn't know. We really didn't understand. It wasn't something we're responsible for. God speaks about that in the next verse, verse 12. Look at Proverbs 24, verse 12. It says, if you say, see, we did not know this, does he not consider it who weighs the heart? And does he not know it who keeps your soul? And will he not render to each man according to his work? He considers, he knows, he will render, this verse says. This gives us the third truth for challenging times, and that's this. Our responses have consequences. Our responses have consequences. People cry out, we want justice, we want justice. That's what we heard all summer long, right? With all the riots going on all over the nation. What is justice? Justice is giving to a person what they deserve. That's justice, giving to each person what they deserve. So a man who rescues someone being led away to death, he deserves reward for doing that. A man who is actually leading a person away to death, justice for him is getting what he deserves, which is punishment. God is a God of justice, and he says, I will give to everyone what they deserve. And that means our responses have consequences. Our responses have consequences. God says, I know who in the 1940s truly did not understand that the Jews were being killed. I know, because I know the heart. I keep a person's soul, and I'm the one who's going to render back. I know who was ignorant of the circumstances going on. In addition to that, I know who knew. I know who knew and looked the other way, who said, I don't want to get involved. That's too scary. I could get killed. I'm not going to do anything. And he says, I will render justice to those who ignored the situation and did nothing. Corrie ten Boom's family saved over 800 people. Most of her family died in the process of doing it. She just barely escaped death herself. But what is their reward? Their reward on entering heaven will be so great because God is God of justice. He gives to each person what they deserve. Now, we understand how this applies to Christians who were living in the 1940s. What about us today? How does this apply to us? In 1973, in January, the United States Supreme Court said it is legal now for a woman to kill her unborn child in her womb. That's legal. You'll no longer be prosecuted. And since that time, 72 million babies have been killed. 72 million. One report I read said this, in 2018 alone, it says there were more deaths from abortion in 2018 than all deaths from cancer and AIDS and smoking and alcohol and traffic accidents combined. You take all those terrible experiences which people die from, that number does not come and rise up to the number of abortions in just 2018. The question for us today is, do unborn babies qualify for people being led away for slaughter in these verses? Now, there's lots of debate, as you know, about that. You go to most universities and most hospitals, and they'll tell you, no, that is just a thing. What's in the womb is just a mass of tissue, like your appendix. It's not alive. It's a potential person, but it's not a person. And therefore, we can do abortions. On the other side, there's a lot of arguments, including a lot of medical facts that can't be argued with. Number one, at 18 days, there's a heartbeat in the baby. At 40 days, there are brain waves. At 56 days, there is a response to touch when you touch it. And at 98 days, there's hearing. We know these things. Now, what does this speak about? Does this give evidence that this is just a thing like your appendix? Does your appendix have its own heartbeat and its own brain waves and response to touch? And can your appendix hear? We're not talking about the same type of things here. And medical science proves this to be true. Opinions differ, and arguments go back and forth, as you well know. Does God weigh in on this? Because he's the author of life. What does God have to say about this? Well, God never says that a prisoner in a cell is a human being, does it? There's no verses saying prisoners in jail cells are human beings. But every time it talks about prisoners in jail cells, it implies that they're living human beings, right? In the same way, the Bible never says unborn babies are human beings. It never really, the topic never comes up. But every time it talks about unborn babies, it's clearly assumed that unborn babies are alive human beings. It's not even a question. In Luke chapter 1, we have the angel Gabriel coming to Mary and telling her that she's going to have the Son of God. And he goes on to say this. He says, Luke 1:36, "Behold, even your relative Elizabeth has also conceived a son in her old age." The word son is a very specific word in the Greek language. It means a baby boy. It doesn't mean a thing, a mass of tissue like an appendix. It means a tiny human being baby boy. And that's what was inside Elizabeth. And notice when it was inside her. It wasn't, in the third trimester, there was a living baby boy in Elizabeth. She conceived at the moment of fertilization. There entered into the world a living baby boy. That clearly says what Elizabeth had inside her was not a thing or a mass of tissue like an appendix, but a human being. It goes on to say in Luke 1:41, and it came about that when Elizabeth heard Mary's greeting, the baby leaped in her womb. That is a different word from a baby boy. That's the generic word, baby. It is not a word for a mass of tissue, like an appendix or thing that isn't alive. It's the same word you find anywhere else in the Bible when it talks about someone carrying a baby, a human baby. And it says that baby was in her womb. A baby was in her womb. And listen to what it says 3 verses later in Luke 1:44. As soon as the sound of your greeting reached my ears, the baby, same word, in my womb leaped for joy. Joy is what? It's an emotion. Our appendixes don't have joy. A mass of tissue does not have joy. A living creature has joy. So, it's not a thing. It's not a mass of tissue like an appendix. When the Bible speaks about unborn children, it clearly speaks of them as being living human beings who even have emotions. And so that informs us about our verses here in Proverbs. If unborn babies are human beings, as the Bible teaches is true, then they qualify as people worthy of protection when they're led away to death. Right? That verse might as well include unborn babies, because there's no difference between a live human being outside the womb and the baby inside the womb. They're both living human beings. These verses then, God gives us a command to rescue people who are being led away. He says that's the measure of your strength, of what you're going to do in the time of trouble. What is your response going to be? That measures how strong you are. And God says, your choices have consequences, because I rendered everyone according to what they've done. So what can we do? What can we do? Well, in 1973, the Roe versus Wade decision caught most churches completely unprepared. And a lot of churches at that time just did nothing. They didn't talk about it. They didn't speak about it. It wasn't going to be the type of subject that was going to get people into their church and cause their church to grow. It was a controversial issue. And so a lot of churches said, we're just not going to deal with it. As a result, there was a span there which most churches didn't do anything. But slowly, some churches started stepping forward, and the first things they did is start producing materials, published materials, which spoke about God's truth and medical truth to get this out and influence people. Shortly after that, they started doing rallies for Marching for Life, and they started promoting pro-choice candidates. And as this was growing, people became more aware. At the same time, some Christians were bombing abortion clinics and burning them to the ground in order to stop that. That created more complications on its own. But then came something that was just the game changer, and that was technology. The ultrasound machine came along and was being used now to show people what was going on inside the womb, and they could see live pictures of a moving baby who clearly was in the shape of a human being. And what happened is that when women and men saw this, 80% of them changed their mind about getting an abortion. 80%. Because of ultrasound technology showing them what was really going on inside the womb. Today, abortions have been steadily coming down since the 1980s as a result of adoption agencies and foster parenting and crisis pregnancy centers and doctors and lawyers who are standing up and challenging what our culture largely has been accepting. And it's a wonderful thing. It's a thing to rejoice about. But the battle's not done. It is not done. Last year in Pennsylvania alone, 31,000 babies were aborted. 31,000. Every year on 9/11, we have the commemoration of the people who lost their lives in the Twin Towers. That was just a little over 2,000. This was 31,000. We take the time to mourn 2,000. We certainly got to mourn the 31,000 in Pennsylvania alone. God says unborn babies are human beings and that we must do something to help rescue them. What can you and I do? Number one, respectfully tell others what God says. Just what's been mentioned in this sermon already. Lots of people aren't being told that. They're being told the opposite. This doesn't matter. It's just a massive tissue. Just get it done with and move on guilt-free. People need to know. And that word respectfully is very important because we've all heard the shouting matches and the screaming matches and the insults and the put-downs, and that's not the way to get God's truth out ever. God says the servant of the Lord must not strive, must not fight. We don't get the truth out by yelling and screaming at people. Respectfully telling people the truth. Number two, encourage mothers in crisis pregnancies. That's a scary time for a lot of women, a lot of young women, single, don't know what's going on. Abortion seems like a quick way to end it. If you know a person like that, move toward them and help them. Number three, write leaders to support pro-life legislation. It's never been easier to get involved politically because of the internet and being able to directly go to the website of your senator or congressman. There are, like the Pennsylvania Family Council has lists where you can sign up, where they will contact you when pro-life legislation is coming through and give you the name of your senator or congressman and help you write the letters. It's never been easier. Don't miss that opportunity. It's not time-consuming, and it's very powerful, and it's doing something. Number three, support crisis pregnancy centers as we do the Crossroads Crisis Pregnancy Center, and we thank you, Becky, for heading that up for our church. That is making a huge difference. Then, in addition to that, volunteer at a crisis pregnancy center. They need people to help out. They need clothing. They need toys. They need supplies. At any time, we can call our crisis pregnancy centers and say, what practical needs do you have? And we can give to them. Distribute pro-life literature. Participate in pro-life marches, and many of you have. Organize pro-life speakers to address and speak in schools. Consider adopting a child. That is one way to help contribute to this. And then, most importantly, to pray. If we try all of this on our own strength, we will lose. The media is totally against pro-life and pro-abortion. The government at this moment we're going to see a lot of changes in the next 4 years, as it's more likely going to become easier and easier to get an abortion and more difficult and difficult to save lives. We cannot do this on our own, but at the same time, with God's power, all things are possible. We hear or see of a lightning bolt coming down from the sky, taking a tree and just turning it into a torch. God has power, but a lot of it just remains up there. And he says to us, pray down his power into these situations to be able to explode and cause great fire of good and to tear down what's wrong. And by praying, you and I can release that. It's an important, powerful ministry. Pray for the end of abortion. Just pray worldwide, nationwide, statewide. God, end abortion. Do what it takes. Pray for mothers in crisis pregnancy. Pray for people who are working with them, the counselors in these clinics. Pray for the elected officials to be able to stand up and promote pro-life policies. Pray for voters to elect pro-life candidates. There's so much that can be done, but it will be held back if you and I don't pray. Prayer can accomplish a great deal. And may I say, if you have been a participant in encouraging an abortion, whether as a mother or father, or as a grandparent or a friend, pray for God's forgiveness. As Dale said, it's a terrible sin, but it is a forgivable sin. God forgives, God cleanses, God washes that away. Pray for forgiveness for that, and then pray for God to use you to be able to save unborn babies for the rest of your life, to be able to participate in making sure that this doesn't happen again. Our passage gives us three truths. Number one, we all live in times of trouble. It's punctuated by nice times, but it's trouble all around us. Number two, our responses will happen. In times of trouble, we will respond. Looking the other way is a response. Ignoring it is a response. Stepping forward and doing something is a response, and it shows the measure of our strength. And our responses, number three, have consequences. God says, I render to everybody justice, what they deserve. So what is your response going to be? Here are just some of the things up here. Can you say, I'm going to choose one of these things and I'm going to do it? God calls, and may call some of you, to really a large part in these things. Then respond to that. God may call you to have a smaller role in these things. Then respond to that. But God calls us, through these verses we looked at today, calls all of us to do something. None of us can just turn the other way, like some of the people did in 1940, and say, it doesn't matter, I don't want to get involved, it's too costly. We have to do something. God commands us, rescue them, deliver them who are being led away to death. So in some way, pick something up here and start doing it. Or if you're doing it, continue doing it. God loves these little babies. And He's shown us the need. We're not ignorant of it. And now God says, be the salt and light in the world. Shine brightly. Push back the evil. Get involved. All right.